Alrighty. Awesome. All right. So where we're going to kick it off. Now, here's the thing. That's how I normally start it. Now, where we're going to kick off the reading is not where I'm going to say where we kick it off. Because what happens is Steve, hi, Steve. He has to listen to this. Yeah, it's for Steve. And he's got to like label it for the upload. So we're going to start somewhere a little different. So we're for Steve 156. That's where Steve's going to pick us up. But we're going to come back to 156. But for the rest of us, let's pop over to page 180. Okay, bye, Steve. You can go. Thanks for listening. Listen, I want you to know I think that's funny. And that like just tickles me. We're going to pop over to page 180. And what are we going to do? We're going to wrap up the chapter Dr. Bob's Nightmare. And you might be like, oh, why are we doing that? Or you might not think anything about this. And I've decided we're going to blame Rob. This is on Rob. And so Rob's like, Paige, why don't you read all of Dr. Bob's Nightmare? And I'm like, well, I do normally do the second half. So we're going to miss Scylla and Charybdis. We're definitely going to miss Steamboat Annie and the tie-in with Steamboat Annie to the fun facts that I've already forgot. I want to remember, but I can't. I know, doesn't stick. But we're going to wrap up Dr. Bob's Nightmare, the last little bit of it, just for Rob. I mean, it's for all of us and our learning and our spiritual growth, and it ties a nice little bow on it, and that's what I do with my sponsees. But it's fun for me to throw Rob under the bus. So welcome. We're on page 180, and don't get too attached because we'll be going back to 156. Alrighty. So at the very top of page 180, it says that was June 10th, 1935. Now, last week I mentioned that his likely sobriety date was actually June 17th because the conference started on June 10th. And you would have thought I like kicked a puppy, and I would never, not even a metaphorical one. Like people were like, what? And I saw that face. What I want you to know is if you're ever hearing about the history of AA and you're hearing like, wait a minute, it didn't exactly happen like that. It wasn't literally at the kitchen table. What I want you to know is Alcoholics Anonymous is essentially parables. They're stories to convey meaning. And you'll find that you do that when you share your own story. Right? When we share our own story, we maybe don't repeat all the expletives that we're told, and some of those edges get softer because we're trying to convey a meaning. So does it matter that he sobered up more likely June 17th than June 10th? No, but the reason I brought that up is because I wanted to illustrate something that we're going to see when we talk about AA number 3. So this was June 10th, 1935, and that was my last drink. And the message that we were talking about last week was that all these 12 steps, all of the steps, as a way of life, were vital to permanent recovery. If I want permanent recovery, I got to do all of this. We say half measures avail us nothing. You know what that means? That means not doing all of this and I'm going to get drunk. That's what that means, And that was what Dr. Bob's experience was. We're going to see that my brain's a little done for today. So we are going to do our best. All right. And it says the question which might naturally come into your mind would be, what did the man do or say that was so different from what others had done or said? So Bill Wilson, when he carried this message, what was different about him? With all of the exploration that Dr. Bob had done in terms of spirituality and alcoholism and the Oxford group, what was different? It must be remembered that I had read a great deal. And a cool thing that I didn't know and that I learned when I got to visit Dr. Bob's house is Dr. Bob was quite the insomniac. And earlier in Dr. Bob's Nightmare, it talks about he has that fear of not sleeping. And during that time, he couldn't sleep. He read. He was like an avid reader. In fact, maybe more of a rabid reader. Like he was a reader and he was after it. And so, if you have those people that in your life that are like, oh, let me research that or let me read about that. Like that's Dr. Bob. He's getting all the information, everything that was available. So it must be remembered that I had read a great deal and talked to everyone who knew or thought they knew anything about the subject of alcoholism. There is a difference. And it says, but this was a man who had experienced many years of frightful drinking. Experience. Here is somebody who had this experience, who had almost all the drunkard's experiences known to man, but who had been cured by the very means I had been trying to employ. That is to say, the spiritual approach. He gave me information about the subject of alcoholism, which was undoubtedly helpful. Of far more importance. Now, this is in italics, which means the drunks were like, hey, that's important, right? Of far more importance was the fact that he was the first living human with whom I had ever talked, who knew what he was talking about in regards to alcoholism from actual experience. Shoulder to shoulder, sharing my experience. Experience with what? The allergy. Experience with what? The mental obsession. I know what it's like to take that drink and have it take me. I know what it's like to have to stay sober, to need to stay sober, but I can't stay sober. In other words, he talked my language. Some might say the language of the heart. Oh, what a great title for a book that somebody could write in AA. So, he knew all the answers, and certainly not because he had picked them up in his reading. And actually, man, it's a little early and I'm on a tangent. We're wrapping up Dr. Bob's Nightmare, so I'm going on a tangent on top of a tangent. Anyone here ever been nervous to sponsor? You don't have to raise your hand. But if you, because what are we afraid of? We're afraid that we're going to mess them up. I'm going to point something out. Alcoholism is a terminal disease. It's about as bad as it can get. Also, something about alcoholism. No human power is sufficient. I am but human power. Wonderful. It's not my responsibility to keep them sober. My responsibility is to be adept with this way of life and to be knowledgeable about my experience. With my alcoholism, my experience with the spiritual experience, and my experience with these 12 steps. That is my responsibility. Now, when it says he had all the answers, that's another fear. Man, my sponsee or my potential newcomer, they're going to ask me a question and I'm not going to have the answer. Crazy thought. That's okay. Do you know what I mean? That's okay. Did you know that you can tell your sponsees, this is radical information. You could tell them, oh, let me look into that for you. Or let me ask my sponsor. Or let me get back. Crazy. But here's my experience. Oftentimes, man, the answers just come. And not in a smart, I'm being a smarty pants sort of way. But the answers come because we're talking about something that is experiential. You know what I mean? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about something that is intellectual. My last talk is creeping over into this talk. But that's what we're talking about. And I can't, if I have the book in hand, the power of God working through my heart, man, and the desire to help, I can't mess it up. You know what I mean? Alcoholics Anonymous has to be alcoholic proof. Cocaine Anonymous has to be addict proof. Drug Addicts Anonymous has to be addict proof. Gamblers Anonymous, gambler proof. You know what I'm saying? 12 steps has to be, you know what I mean? I'm not so powerful I can mess it up. All I've got to do is follow the directions. So he knew all the answers, and certainly not because he had picked them up in his reading. He knew from experience. That's what I'm after. It is a most wonderful blessing to be relieved of the terrible curse with which I was afflicted. My health is good, and I have regained my self-respect and the respect of my colleagues. My home life is ideal, and my business is as good as can be expected in these uncertain times. And he's got an optimistic slant, but yeah, a lot of the early AAs, a lot of the co-founders really struggled financially. Bill Wilson, page 3, I had arrived. He didn't arrive again. You know what I mean? Financially. And I just point that out because that really is on the way for so many people in 12-step. Like truly, that is the result for so many people. But that's really not the aim. It's wonderful if it happens. You know what I mean? But what are we after is something deeper than that. And Dr. Bob, in his career, it was reported that he worked with something or oversaw the care of something like 5,000 patients in his 16 years of life, that he was sober, his 16 years of sobriety. I mean, that is way more. That has way more value than what I would have in a 401k. It's a different retirement plan in Canada. I just wanted to make the 401k jump because I thought that would land, How's your retirement savings page? Cool, let's keep going. How's your spiritual savings? Doing well, yeah, doing well. Return on investment, it's rocking and rolling. You know what I mean? When you help a drunk you don't want to help, or you help an addict you don't want to help, oh, there's some spiritual ROI on that bad boy, some of you are like, that is not how you use that term. Yeah, but fair enough. I don't know those ones well. Alrighty, so I spent a great deal of time passing on what I had learned to others who want it and need it badly. That hopelessness. They want this thing. I'm not trying to give it to people who don't want it. I kind of joke around a lot. I'm like, this whole thing is consensual. I'm not, if you don't want it, that's cool. And I'm after that enthusiastic consent. I'm after like, let's go, let's dive in. Woo, inventory. You don't have to be that excited about it. I know that might be an unrealistic expectation. People that jazzed about inventory. I am. But so passing on what I had learned to others who wanted and needed badly. I do it for 4 reasons. So this is why we work with others. 4 reasons. 1, a sense of duty. It's hot, like, that addict or that alcoholic, whatever fellowship you're a part of, that person who comes into the room who is beaten and broken and hopeless. And you're able to sit down and say, can I help you? Can I help you find this way out? Man, there's a sense of duty that I get to help when no one else can. 2, it is a pleasure. Tying back into the last talk about this is experiential. Nobody thinks it's a pleasure before we start working with others. Nobody's like, oh man, hanging out with people like me, ugh, helping them, ugh, we're not like, what a pleasure, But truly, this thing, man, when I'm doing this, when I'm offering this way of life, it really is a spiritual return on investment. You know what I mean? It's paying dividends. It is a pleasure. Now, if I got sponsees here, what I want you to know, which I know I do, you guys are pleasures, delightful to work with. I'm just letting you know that. and the ones that aren't here, I was going to be like, sucks to be them. No, I love them too. I just wanted to let y'all know I love you. All right, focus. We're learning maybe I shouldn't do 2 like hour-long talks back to back. That might be a little like woo. Or we're learning that I should do this more often. All right. So it's a pleasure. There's a tremendous joy in this work, this way of life, and working with others. 3, because in so doing, I am paying my debt to the man who took the time to pass it on to me. In my home group, we read these 4 reasons. And it's, man, I get to repay a debt. And I really feel that in 12 step, what happens is I get transformed. Who I am changes, and like in a profoundly positive way. I become the person, or closer to the person that I always wanted to be. You know what I mean? And it's like, man, how could I possibly repay this? And, I do a lot of spiritual seeking, and one of the most sure signs of spiritual experience that is described in a variety of faith traditions, not just what we do here in 12 Step, but is the most sure sign of a spiritual experience is the desire to go help somebody else. And you know what happens? It's a debt. It's a debt that no one's going to ask me to repay, not in the sense that I might think. You know what I mean? That debt that I owe, that freedom, that joy, nobody's like, Paige, if you don't sponsor, I'll break your kneecaps. And then when I'm at an in-person meeting, sometimes I say that's what happened to me. And then the crowd, like the people are, oh, like, don't make that joke. But I do. No, nobody broke my kneecaps. That's not what happened. But nobody's going to be like, yeah, you do it all 3, Here's what it looks like when the call to repay the debt. It's somebody that comes to a meeting that is brand new and doesn't have a sponsor and doesn't know how to get wild. It looks like a phone call of somebody reaching out for help that I take. It looks like a service commitment that I don't want to take. You know what I mean? It's saying yes to something I don't want to do for the 12-step fellowship I'm a part of. That is how my debt begins to get repaid. And once you know it, listen, it's like some predatory spiritual lending, because the more I try, I didn't mean for this whole part to be as financially focused as it is, but predatory lendings where the interest is like insane and you can never repay it. That's what AA is. That's what CA is. That's what 12-step is. Because I try to repay that debt by working with others. And once you know, I get more than that initial investment. I get paid back again and again and again. So that's why I do it. Now, 4, because every time I do, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. If I want permanent contented sobriety, I have got to work with others. Page 89, the chapter Working with Others, it says nothing will so much ensure immunity. And that's what I need. If I'm an alcoholic, I know I'm going to drink again. If I'm an addict, I know I'm going to use again. I need immunity. And nothing will so much ensure immunity from alcoholism, from addiction, as intensive work with others. So the more I work with others, the more I take out a little more insurance against a possible slip. Man, that's real financial in this. Like, oh, the spiritual finances, make those deposits in the spiritual bank account, get a little savings. Life will happen and I make a withdrawal. But if I've been doing this a while, you know what I mean? I can stay financially in the black. And some of you are really aware that I don't have a lot of financial literacy and are judging me, and that is accurate. Okay. So it says, unlike most of our crowd, I did not get over my craving for liquor much during the first 2.5 years of abstinence. It was almost always with me, but at no time have I been anywhere near yielding. And that's an interesting thing. I think he's using the word craving, not as that we would use it as in the physical allergy, but he's talking about that there was something in him that wanted to drink. But I want to point something out. At no point was he near taking a drink. So what had happened? So even though he had that yearning with him, the obsession was still removed. And here's the thing. I don't know. I'm not psychic, and I don't, you know what I mean? And even though I call like the co-founders and some of the AA history people my homies, and my broskies, I don't actually know what was happening with Dr. Bob, the Roberts, whoa, what's up, my guy? But here's what I know from my experience. The depth of my pain and my suffering has led me to dive into this work more than I would have if I had not experienced that pain. And I'm talking about, man, I have had some pain, and I allude to it when I sometimes talk about things that I did, that like some of the things that I've gone through in sobriety have been way worse than some of the things I went through before my alcoholism and addiction. Like, I've had some stuff, but that pain in my hands is a dumpster fire, and it is awful for everyone around me. You can smell those burning tires, you know what I mean? But when it's in God's hands, when I'm doing this, it drives me back into this work, back into a relationship with God, back into a power, and back into working with others. And Dr. Bob worked with a lot of people, or oversaw the care of a lot of people. And Dr. Bob, in terms of 12-step, and Dr. Bob was on it. He was way more successful than Bill. Like, he was on it. And what could possibly drive him to do that much work? I wonder if it would not be that pain of the first 2.5 years. And it's a reminder. So we were talking last week when we were talking about the history of AA and Bill Wilson not getting what he wanted, that whole, deal like was bogged down in controversy, and there was possibly a hostile takeover and all of this stuff happening, and nobody's talking, and it's bad and it's awful, and he doesn't get what he wants. And he's living in the pain of the humiliation and not getting that financial quick fix. And he's living in the suffering of his experience alone and broke in Akron, Ohio. And I had a great time there. But he might not have at first, you know what I mean? And where does God show up in the depth of his pain? The depth of his pain led him to go work with somebody else. And that's my experience. And like, again, I don't know about you guys. I was gonna say I don't talk about, I talk about it quite a bit. I'm actually fairly transparent. I had a really tough, like 2.5 years going through like traumatic loss and grief and trauma through that grief. Um, and, and like, it's a constant reminder of, I don't know what's best for me, because the pain that I have been going through has driven a greater sense of, I need God and I need a relationship with God, but also a greater sense of empathy and compassion for others. And it's one of those things when life is on me. I have a sponsee and a grand sponsee. We were joking about when life is lifing. It's life and hard. You know what I mean? Oh, it's extra lifey out there. But when life is hitting, if I'm able to face that and face it, not run from it, face it with these 12 steps and a power greater than myself, face it with the idea of whatever I go through, I get to use this to help another person. And as a result, I get to be present to this to help others. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, man, that gives my painting meaning and purpose and direction that I didn't have when I was just in my alcoholism or in my addiction. You know, what happens here is utter transformation, not just of me, but 124 talks about the worst things I've done, the depth of my shame, the depth of my pain gets transformed to assets. It is a transformational process. So Dr. Bob, he had a tough go, 2.5 years. Maybe that was helpful in driving him to work with others. Thank goodness, you know, like maybe, I don't know. That was a tangent. Sorry, guys. All right. It has been almost always with me, but at no time have I been anywhere near yielding. I used to get terribly upset when I saw my friends drink, and I knew I could not. But I schooled myself to believe that though I once had the same privilege, I had abused it so frightfully that it had been withdrawn. You know, it's that idea that like everyone's in their lifetime has a quantity of alcohol that they're allowed to drink with impunity. And he drank it in the first few years. You know what I mean? He was 6 months in and drank that impunity. You know what I mean? That's what he's joking about. And I love this. He says, so it doesn't behoove me to squawk about it. Listen, it has behooved me to squawk about a lot of things. I'm just kidding. I try not to squawk. Instead of squawk, I try to do inventory, and I find inventory behooves me. Just I love that idea of like, I should get a shirt that says inventory behooves me, you know, like, or make a little sticker design. Nobody would buy that sticker, you know. Recovered Jaywalker, everyone's like, I love that one. Or like my outright mental defectives, yeah, that's so cool. But inventory behooves me, not quite. But I'll still do it for me. Anyway, so uh, so it doesn't behoove me to squawk about it, for after all, nobody ever had to throw me down and pour liquor down my throat. He says, if you think you are an atheist, an agnostic, a skeptic, or have any form of intellectual pride, and this time, like my last talk, for those that weren't there, I was talking about how this whole thing is experiential and not intellectual. And that was the kind of thrust of my little big book bounce around. And I just like, it ties in so well. And I didn't plan that. Listen, I planned very little in my life already. But if you have any form of intellectual pride which keeps you from accepting what is in this book, I feel sorry for you. If you think you are strong enough to beat the game alone, that is your affair. And so it's like, man, if you don't want this thing, okay. If you're like, no, I'm not open to trying this, or I'm not open to any of these ideas, okay. Okay, man. Have your experience. But if you really and truly want to quit drinking liquor for good and for all, and sincerely feel that you must have some help, we know that we have an answer. There is a solution. We've got one. And that is the spiritual awakening that happens as the result of the 12 steps. That is the answer that we have. And he says, it never fails. It never fails. If all of these promises, it never fails, promise, come with fine print. 5th step promises, got to do that 5th step. Fearless and thorough. 9th step promises, about before we're halfway done our amends, got to make those. You know what I mean? It never fails. So that's the promise. Here's the fine print. It never fails. If you go about it with 1/2 the zeal that you have been in the habit of showing when you're getting another drink. 1/2 the zeal is like enthusiasm or effort. One had half the effort. I mean, that's not, I mean, that's not bad. That's not bad, you know? Just, and so some of you are like, still, how much inventory you want me to write page? It doesn't behoove me to do it, you know? And I love this one. And you, of course, there are religious connotations, and you don't have to grab a hold of the religious connotation if you're not a fan of it. But I love this promise. Your heavenly Father, capital H, capital F. So we're pointing to a power greater than yourself, will never let you down. The God of your understanding, and keep in mind, to understand is to know through experience. The God that we find is the result of these 12 steps, will never let you down. What an incredible promise. So now, before we go back to page 156, I just wanted to go on a very small, now this one was planned, a very, very small Henrietta Seiberling tangent. And this is to get Rob back. I'm just teasing. I love her. Like, I love Sister Ignatia. Like, man, if you're ever like interested in some of the history, Sister Ignatia, she helped Dr. Bob kind of really sneak alcoholics into the Akron City Hospital. And if you're like, boy, I really like coffee at my meetings and I really like sobriety chips, you can thank Sister Ignatia for that. That was all her. And I just love these non-alcoholic gals who were some of the links in the chain who brought us together. Now, Henrietta Seiberling, that's what she looked like. I didn't plan a thing, and Rob put a thing in the chat. But here's where I fell in love with her. There was this talk she gave, and the talk was turned into a pamphlet that you can get, like not a conference-approved pamphlet or anything like that. And in it, you can kind of tell that she wasn't like the most happy, and she was a little negative, and perchance a little judgmental. And I want you to know I love that God can use people like that too. You know what I mean? And in it, she talks about 3 warnings, 3 things she thought were going to be really dangerous for alcoholics. The first was money, and the second was attention and notoriety. So she really was like, hey, you guys should stay anonymous, you know? Now, this is the 3rd warning, and I'm just going to read it. And this is why I love her. So it says, this brings me to the 3rd thing that would be destructive. In the early days, Bob and Bill said to me, Henrietta, I don't think we should talk too much about religion or God. And so this is her response. I said to them, well, we're not out to please the alcoholics. They have been pleasing themselves all these years. Call this out. Call this out. I just love it. We are out to please God. And if you don't talk about what God does and your faith and your guidance, then you might as well be a Rotary Club or something like that, because God is your only source of power. And they finally agreed, and they weren't afraid anymore. It is my great hope that they will never be afraid to acknowledge God and what he has done for them. So that was that line. I'm like, oh girl, calling me out. I love it. Because yeah, I was blazing myself for years. Wasn't that happy though. All right, 156. back to where we're gonna kick us off. And what we're gonna talk about is really like how quickly they got into working with others, how quickly they got into carrying this message. So, and we're going to talk a little bit about the history and the story of AA number 3. So we are at the 3rd full paragraph, but life, right? So we're talking 156, but life, and that's where we're picking up. So, but life was not easy for the 2 friends, Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. Plenty of difficulties presented themselves. Both saw that they must keep spiritually active. And I want to point out, spiritually active, what are we talking about? A way of life. That this is not a set it and forget it program. I got to do this thing every day. And they saw very quickly, very early, that they must keep spiritually active. So it goes on, just one sec. One day, they called up a head nurse of a local hospital. They explained their need and inquired if she had a first-class alcoholic prospect. So they know that they've got to work with others. They know, like, that's how do we keep spiritually active? Of course, I need to continue my daily disciplines, continuing to grow and clear away the channel between me and God, but I gotta work with others. So it says, yes, she replied, we've got a corker. So we got a drunk. He's just beaten up a couple nurses, goes off his head completely when he's drinking, but he's a grand chap when he's sober. He's been in here 8 times in the last 6 months. Welcome, Bill Dotson. Woo, AA number 3. So you can make a little note, AA number 3. And most of the co-founders or the early AA members get a gentler introduction into their stories. Dr. Bill Dodson, we're just gonna lay it all bare. But for those that are new, or for those who are not sure, what does it mean to be an alcoholic, or what does it mean to be an addict, or whatever brings you to this all-inclusive study, we can see some symptoms of what this illness is. So it says, goes off his head completely when drinking, but he's a grand chap when he's sober. Now, goes off his head completely when drinking is a sign that he's got the physical allergy. Because if I have the ability to control the number of drinks that I take, I stop before punching nurses. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's like non-alcoholics will get a little, they'll get a little buzz. They'll get a little like, let me tell you about, a little chit chatty, but they're not getting to nurse punching or taxi cab driver punching, in case we forgot that Bill did that too. You know what I mean? So if I have the ability to control the amount I take, I stop before punching. So he doesn't have the ability. Now, it says he's a grand chap when he's sober, though he's been in here 8 times in the last 6 months. And what does that likely indicate? That likely indicates he has the mental obsession. In the last 8 months, he goes to the hospital. He swears off, I'm never going to drink again. I'm not going to do this again. And then he has a thought. And a thought that tells him, that will be different. I can drink again. Nobody will know. I won't end up in the Akron City Hospital. I won't, you know what I mean? It won't happen to me. You know what I mean? So that's a sign he's got the allergy. That's a sign he's got the obsession. So understand he was once a well-known lawyer in town, but just now we've got him strapped down tight. So he was in those like 4-point restraints. Things were not going well. But again, what we're pointing to is that alcoholism can affect anyone. You know what I mean? Here's a prominent lawyer, Dr. Bob, a successful doctor, Bill Wilson, a stock speculator. You know what I mean? These were men who had success in their careers and yet were still alcoholic. So here was a prospect, all right, but by the description, none too promising. I don't know if we can help him. That was kind of the vibe. The use of spiritual principles. Now, keep in mind, when I talk about spiritual principles, I like to take, and I want to be very clear, when I talk about spiritual principles, I talk about the principles or the tangible actions of the steps. Because just bear with me with this. The use of the steps or the actions of the steps was not in such cases was not so well understood as it is now. That makes sense. We didn't know if we could 12-step a guy like this. But I want to be really clear. That is an approach that I take that helps simplify the process. And if you come from the approach of, no, the principles are things like hope and faith and courage and brotherly love and justice and those sorts of things, what I want you to know is that you are right. You are right. I am wrong. And I always like to be like, join me though. It's fun being wrong. Over here, Captain Wrong, Team Wrong. Whee! We'll have shirts. And I won't make it be the shirts that say, inventory behooves me. It won't be those shirts. It'll be something more fun. So join us. I won't buy anyone's shirts. Okay. So it says, but one of the friends said, put him in a private room, we'll be down. And that idea that like, it was not so understood. Somebody who has been in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out is probably a more promising prospect than somebody who's showing up to the hospital for the first time. And what I mean by that is, man, don't I have to come to the end of myself, that hopelessness, right? And so I really enjoy working with chronic relapsers because I don't have to beat around the bush and be like, well, no, it's like, you have this thing, like, let's go, like, let's do it. So They didn't know. And what we know is the more hopeless, the better. It's like, yes, we're here for that. But they weren't sure yet. They were just trying to work with others, you know? 2 days later, a future fellow of Alcoholics Anonymous stared glassily at the stranger beside his bed. So I have it either June 28th or June 26th, because I think I have both in my thing. Oh yeah, they visited him on June 28th, but he had gotten into the hospital and punching nurses. June 26th. That's what it was. So they visited him on June 28th of 1935. Now, thank you. I got the Rob A-OK, got my history right, and that's all I need. Validate me. But uh, the reason I'm pointing out these dates, and the reason, if you remember at the start of this thing, I pointed out that Dr. Bob's sobriety date was likely June 17th. That means that Dr. Bob was 11 days sober. I want to point that out because it really does not take long to get well. It does not take long to have a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. It doesn't take long to get well. And it says 2 days later, future fellow of Alcoholics. This is Bill Dodson. Also, you can understand why we changed the stories in the back of the book, because we just think it's a bunch of, Bills and Bobs and Williams and Roberts and maybe a Richard or two. That's my dick joke. You know. Thank you. All righty. So 2 days later, a future fellow of Alcoholics Anonymous stared glassily at the strangers beside his bed. Who are you, fellows? And why this private room? I was always in a ward before. Said one of the visitors, we're giving you a treatment for alcoholism. Hopelessness. Hopelessness. Oh, goody. There it is. Hopelessness was written large on the man's face as he replied, oh, but that's no use. Nothing would fix me. I'm a goner. So he's not only does he have hopelessness on him, he knows he has this intrinsic sense of hopelessness. He knows that he's hopeless. The last 3 times I got drunk on the way home from here. Anyone ever go to treatment and get drunk the day after you got discharged? Go to detox, get drunk right after, relapse right after? Yeah, that isn't enough to keep people like us sober. And he says, I'm afraid to go out the door. I can't. Yeah, he's a corker and a goner. Yeah. Oh, Billy, I was going to say Billy Dots. The Billy Dots, my homie. Not Billy Dubs, that's different. Also my homie though. So I'm afraid to go out the door. I can't understand it. For an hour, the two friends told them about their drinking experiences. So their experiences with the allergy, over and over, he would say, that's me. I drink like that. That's why it can be so vital to have examples from my own life of the cycle, to have those stories. That's where those stories can be really, really helpful. The man in the bed. And if you've ever seen, there's this, Rob knows, he's like, I gotta get the picture. There's this picture, the original is only about postcard size, of the man in the bed. And it's commonly believed that is, an artist's interpretation of of this moment, Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob meeting with Bill Dodson. And if you go to the Akron Intergroup, they have this giant, beautiful stained glass version of it, which is just beautiful. So the man in the bed was told of the acute poisoning from which he suffers, how it deteriorates the alcoholic and warps his mind. So we're talking there about the physical allergy. That's what we're explaining it. And then it says there was much talk about the mental state preceding the first drink. So the mental obsession. So we're like just diving in on that. Hold on. Awesome. All right. I saw my name in the chat, and then I was like, oh, is there a thing for me? If there is a thing for me, keep putting it in the chat, and I'll do my best to catch it and respond and answer questions. Genuinely, put them in the chat. It works well. Not perfectly though, because as we've seen with my attention span. So Not perfect, but the best we got for right now. Alrighty. So they were laying down the foundation of step one. Another way to say it is they were laying down the foundation of what our problem is, the physical allergy, the mental obsession. And they were, oh, but am I coming to stepping stones? Listen, it is easy to get me on a plane. I will come on out. Absolutely. Yeah, I am easily, I'm gonna take a trip, not take a trip. I'm gonna take a trip. I wasn't doing that when I was drinking. It's easy to get me out there. I was asked to do a talk out in Hamilton, and they're like, "We'll see if we can do it hybrid." I'm like, "I'll just buy a plane ticket. I'm coming. I like to travel." Focus. It's not on the committee's time. It's on me because I am impulsive. Shocker. Okay. Yeah, I will come. You just invite me. So yeah, that's me. So the sick man, the very image. So we're laying down that experience of what the problem is, that experience of step one, the very image. You fellows know your stuff, all right, but I don't see what good it'll do. You fellows are somebody. I was once, but I'm a nobody now. You can kind of feel that self-pity that he's got. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. He knows he's a hopeless guy. But I want to point that out. You fellows are somebody. I'm a nobody now. From what you tell me, I know more than ever. I can't stop. So he has a real profound understanding of the mental obsession. We're seeing he's got that step one. And it says, at this, both the visitors burst into a laugh. So the future fellow anonymous, down little to laugh about that I can see. And why might they be laughing? Dr. Bob, who is somebody now, is 11 days sober, 11 days sober, 18 if we want to take the 10th. You know what I mean? If we want to take the 10th, he's a grand old 18, but shave off a week. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you're somebody. I'm a nobody. It's like, no, we're shoulder to shoulder in this thing, The two friends spoke of their spiritual experience. So they're explaining what the solution is, which is a spiritual experience. Another way to say it is they're laying down a bit of the foundation for step two. We're going to see him grasp that in a bit. And told him about the course of action they carried out. So the program of action. For us in 2024, that is the 12 steps, right? Another way to say it is they are laying down the foundation for step three, the foundation for the third step decision, problem, solution, program of action. So he interrupted, and I'm like, shocking, an alcoholic interrupting? No, we would never do such things. Shocking. He interrupted. I used to be strong for the church, but that won't fix it. I've prayed to God on hangover mornings. I'm sure none of us have ever done that. And sworn that I'd never touch another drop. But by 9 o'clock, I'd be boiled as an owl. Oh man, I didn't. Oh, I got it. I sometimes make silly little designs and stickers, and that is my recovered from being boiled as an owl sticker, because I am a child. Uh, so no longer are we boiled as an owl, we can be, no, I was going to be like sober as a sparrow, or like, I was going to make a bunch of like bird metaphors. And if I went down that train of thought, we would not be able to stop me. Nope. So we want to just not go down there already. So the next day found the prospect more receptive. He had been thinking it over. And this is going to be Bill Dodson's second step. Maybe you're right, he said. God ought to be able to do anything. That's it. That's it for a second step for Billy Dots. He added, he sure didn't do much for me when I was trying to fight this booze racket alone, when he's trying to fight alcoholism alone. And the third day, the lawyer gave his life to the care and direction of his creator and said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. Now, what it looks like is that he made his third step decision, and it doesn't say made a decision, it says gave his life. So I think he might have made that third step decision and maybe written an inventory or two, maybe written out an 8-step list. I'm not thinking he made out his amends that day, But I'm thinking, because they took those steps quickly. We remember when we spoke about the gentleman who started AA in Chicago, it was Dr. Bob's afternoon off. He had me at the office where we spent 3 or 4 hours formally going through the 6-step program as it was at that time. So he probably followed up that decision with action. So at minimum, it's a 3rd step. We might see a 3 through 8. So, and I love that he was willing to do anything necessary. That's the thrust of the 3rd step. I'm willing to take actions I don't want to take. I'm willing to work these 12 steps as a way of life, like my life depends on it, because it does. His wife came, scarcely daring to be hopeful, though she thought she saw something different about her husband already. He had begun to have a spiritual experience. That afternoon, he put on his clothes and walked from the hospital a free man. To be a free man is to be recovered. We're not cured of alcoholism, but to be recovered. The mental obsession has lifted. He entered a political campaign, making speeches and frequenting men's gathering places of all sorts, often staying up all night. Now, to quote Shania Twain, that don't impress me much. That is it's so funny because I'm like, I don't music. And then at the other big book study, I'm given words that I have to work in, and one of it was Nickelback. So I don't music, and I'm not like an expert on Canadian music, anywho. But I'm like, who cares? Like, who cares? But what I want to point something out is he got involved in something that is imaginably a little bit high stress. And at that time would be sort of based on your reputation and based on your ability, you know what I mean, to convey and carry a message. And here's a man who is showing up at a high stress environment and showing up with integrity. And it goes on to say, he lost the race by only a narrow margin. And so he did pretty good, you know? And like, I just will say, your response, fine, and no political campaigns until we have at least 3 sponsees. You know, you're not allowed to run for office. No, I'm just kidding. I don't make those rules. I'm just kidding. You do what you want. You know, but like, no, you can't run for public office until you listen. Actually, listen. Don't run for public office, at least until you make amends. And that's me doing you a solid. You do you, though. That's just my joking around. Alrighty. And it says, he lost the race by only a narrow margin, but he had found God. And in finding God, he had found himself. And that line is so true for me. And I want to be clear, I'm going to talk about my experience. And if your experience is different than mine, again, what do I want to emphasize, re-emphasize? You are right and I am wrong. Like, really, I am wrong. That's the takeaway from this big book study. I'm wrong. But for honestly, for my whole life, I was incredibly negative. I was miserable. I was depressive. I was like a little Eeyore or Oscar the Grouch my whole life. In Canada, we have to take French classes. The only French I still remember is "Ça va mal," which is, you know, it's like, "How are you, Paige?" And the response is, "I am sad." That's the only French because I would say it all the time, like miserable. I can figure out "ça va bien." I think I have a little bit of high school Spanish, and it was working its way in there. I'm like, wait, no bueno. I don't know. Where are we? Anywho, we know I can barely do English. We're doing our best. Alrighty. And so my whole life I was miserable. And my whole life I was filled with self-hatred and self-pity. And like, I'm the sort of person that would suck the energy out of the room. And I remember being in the 3rd grade and wanting to kill myself, which is apparently not a typical reaction to the 3rd grade. You know, does not make me alcoholic, but it is apparently an abnormal response to grade 3. And so that's who I was. And so my whole life, I would get typically unsolicited because I was miserable. So I'm not really engaging in, you know, make me feel better conversations. Advice about, you got to love yourself. You got to love yourself. You got to love yourself. And I would have people that would tell me, Paige, you got to do affirmations. And I want to be very clear. I'm not being critical of affirmations, But just my experience was my level of self-hatred, I couldn't even approach affirmations. I'm not somebody that looks myself in the mirror, let alone says in the mirror I'm beautiful or anything like that. Like that was so not who I was. And I couldn't even approach that sort of thing. That's not who I am today. So how did I get to a different place? Well, how I got to the different place is nothing less than these 12 steps as a way of life. You know, I talk about this. Emotional sobriety is the purpose of these 12 steps. And often I would hear, Paige, you got to love yourself first. You can't love others until you love yourself. And that might be true, but that wasn't my experience. I didn't love myself. And then when I started working with others, I still wasn't jazzercised about me as a concept. You know what I mean? But I began to love you. I began to see your inherent value and worth. I began to feel a power flowing through me. And I began to feel this idea that maybe, just maybe, if you are undeniably, inherently valuable and worthy, maybe that could be available for me. And I'm not even a self-love person now, which again is not to say that that's wrong. I really want to be clear. If you're somebody that really resonates with affirmations or resonates with self-love, I'm not being critical of it. But I don't think that's what's happened for me still, which could be I am a bit of a petulant child. And so, so it could be like, no, I don't love myself. No, like I'm just fighting that because I'm a 30-something-year-old adult. And actually I used to do this meeting where it was a whole bunch of women from a treatment center. And at the treatment center, they had a rule, which is if you said a word, a swear word, you had to say 3 affirmations. And I'm like, we have traditions. We are not affiliated. I'm not doing affirmations because I said bad words. You know what I mean? And then I do passive aggressive ones. It wouldn't work. But what has happened for me? Oh, I'm good at passive aggressive affirmations, which is why I don't do them. The passive aggressive ones, because that's not helpful for anyone. But what has happened for me is I believe this line, but in finding God, he found himself. There is something, and keep in mind, I do get off the beam. I do have incredibly difficult moments. I do have real profound struggles, but those moments where I'm cracked open to a love that is not my own. I'm cracked open to a power that is greater than myself. And I awaken to this inherent value and worth. I see it in you well before I could ever see it in me, but I begin to see a glimmer of it in me, that maybe, just maybe, that love is available for me. And 2 minutes left, so we're gonna land this plane. But I'll tell this experience. I remember this was a couple years ago. I was in the backyard and I had a sponsee that was called me, and she began to be like overwhelmed with a feeling of gratitude. And she was like, and her family it wasn't just her sobriety, her family was beginning to recover and to get sober and to stay sober. And she was like thanking me, and you can gather that compliments, receiving those, not my forte. And what happened, and normally I would like duck and dive and dodge and weave and dodge. You can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a compliment. That's a reference. And in that moment, she was like saying thank you. And there was a voice that came from me that was not my voice. And what I said was that everything good in me is God. And that's not self-deprecating. Everything good in me is God. Everything good in me is God. Man, I hated myself. 3rd grade, I don't want to be here anymore. And I'm saying, and I'm meaning, everything good in me is God. And that feels almost boastful. You know what I mean? Like, that is my experience. I got to do this to get there. I couldn't get there from here. And it says that was June. So sobriety date, June 26, 1935. He never drank again. Permanent sobriety. He too has become a respected and useful member of his community. He has helped other men recover and is a power in the church from which he was long absent. So that is what a spiritual awakening can look like. It's permanent sobriety, helpful to others, and a power in the lives of those around us. And if I end now, I end right on the hour. So I'll take it. Let me stop the recording and we can wrap it up with a prayer.